June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea, 200 miles west of Saipan. Vice Admiral Jisaburō Ozawa stood on the bridge of the Taiho, Japan's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, watching the morning sun glint off the wings of over 400 aircraft as they climbed into the sky. It was the largest Japanese carrier strike force assembled since Midway. 9 carriers, 5 battleships, and 430 aircraft, and it represented Tokyo's final gamble to halt the American advance across the Central Pacific. The mission was clear: destroy the U.S. Fifth Fleet and prevent the capture of Saipan. If Saipan fell, B-29 superfortresses would soon be bombing Tokyo from bases just 1,200 miles away. The island had to be held, and to hold it, the American invasion fleet had to be annihilated. Ozawa, a 57-year-old career naval officer with decades of experience in carrier operations, understood the stakes. He had commanded the first air fleet since March 1944 and knew better than anyone the state of Japan's naval aviation. What he saw that morning was not a weapon of war, but a funeral procession in the making. The pilots climbing into those cockpits were not the elite aviators of 1941. Men like Mitsuo Fuchida or Shigekazu Shimazaki, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor. Those men were dead, shot down over Guadalcanal, the Solomons, Rabaul, and the Gilberts in a war of attrition Japan could not win. In their place were boys, most barely 20 years old, with fewer than 100 flight hours, many of whom had never made a carrier landing before joining the fleet. They were brave, they were willing, but they were not ready. And Ozawa knew it. In the weeks leading up to the battle, he had watched training exercises with growing dread. Pilots struggled with basic navigation, often getting lost on short overwater flights. Formation flying was ragged, bombing accuracy abysmal, and the accident rate during practice landings was catastrophic. Fuel shortages had slashed training time from 500 hours per pilot in 1941 to fewer than 100 by mid-1944. When Ozawa requested more aviation gasoline for training, his appeals were denied. "The invasion is happening now," came the reply from Imperial General Headquarters. "There is no time." What Ozawa did not know, but what would soon become horrifyingly clear, was that his pilots were not just outmatched in skill. They were flying into a technological and doctrinal abyss. American carrier aviation had evolved into something Japan could no longer comprehend, let alone counter. The U.S. Navy's Task Force 58, waiting 200 miles to the east, was not merely a larger fleet. It was a manifestation of industrial, scientific, and organizational superiority so vast that the coming engagement would not be a battle, it would be an extermination. Ozawa's mobile fleet, on paper, looked formidable. 9 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, and 6 light carriers carried 430 aircraft. 5 fast battleships, including the Yamato-class Musashi, provided heavy gunfire support. Dozens of cruisers and destroyers screened the formation. But numbers masked a deeper rot. Of the 430 aircraft, only about 200 were frontline combat types, A6M5. The rest were trainers, reconnaissance planes, or obsolete models pressed into service. More critically, the pilots lacked the experience to employ even these aircraft effectively. Japanese naval aviation had once been the world's best. In 1941, a carrier pilot required 500 to 700 flight hours, including 150 hours of carrier qualification. By 1944, that number had collapsed to 80 to 100 hours, with only 10 to 15 carrier landings before deployment. Many new pilots had never fired their guns in the air. They had practiced gunnery on the ground, using fixed targets. In combat, they would face American pilots with 300 to 600 flight hours, extensive gunnery training, and dozens of carrier landings. Ozawa also suspected, correctly, that American intelligence had penetrated Japanese codes. He knew the Americans were aware of his movements. Yet he clung to one strategic hope, the Kantai-Kessen, or decisive battle doctrine. Japanese carriers would launch strikes from beyond the range of American aircraft, 300 miles instead of the usual 200, using the superior range of the Zero and the Judy. American fighters, he believed, would run out of fuel before reaching his fleet. His carriers would remain safe while his aircraft devastated the enemy. It was a plan built on outdated assumptions. What Ozawa did not know was that the Americans had not just better aircraft. They had an entirely new system of naval warfare. Task Force 58, under Admiral Mark Mitscher, consisted of 15 carriers, 7 Essex-class fleet carriers, and 8 Independence-class light carriers, carrying nearly 900 aircraft. Every pilot had a minimum of 300 flight hours. Most were combat veterans with multiple kills. Their primary fighter, the F-6F Hellcat, was not merely superior to the Zero. It was engineered specifically to exploit every Japanese weakness. The Hellcat was 50 miles per hour faster in level flight, could outdive the Zero with ease, and carried 6 50-caliber machine guns with 400 rounds each. Its airframe could absorb tremendous battle damage and keep flying. Most critically, it could outclimb the Zero above 15,000 feet, a direct refutation of the myth that the Zero was invincible in vertical maneuvering. American doctrine had abandoned dogfighting. Instead, pilots used boom and zoom tactics, dive from altitude, make a high-speed firing pass, and climb away before the Zero. But the most decisive advantage Ozawa could not see was radar. Every American carrier and cruiser was equipped with advanced SK and SM radar systems capable of detecting incoming aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles. Fighter direction officers, FDOs, aboard the carriers used this data to vector Hellcats into perfect intercept positions, like chess masters moving pieces with perfect information. The Japanese had no equivalent. Their fighter direction was visual, reactive, and chaotic. By the time they spotted an incoming raid, it was often too late. At 8:30 a.m., Ozawa launched his first strike. 69 aircraft, 27 Zeros, 27 Vals, and 15 Jills. They formed up slowly, struggling to maintain cohesion, and headed east toward the American fleet. On the bridge of the Taiho, Ozawa allowed himself a flicker of hope. Perhaps the Americans were unprepared. Perhaps his range advantage would hold. That hope died at 10 a.m. American radar detected the raid at 150 miles, more than an hour's flight time away. FDOs aboard the carriers calculated speed, heading, and altitude, then positioned 220 Hellcats in a layered defensive screen. High cover at 20,000 feet, medium at 12,000, and low at 5,000. The Japanese pilots, navigating by compass and dead reckoning, had no idea they were flying into a meticulously prepared ambush. What followed was slaughter. The first Japanese pilots to spot the Americans saw not a few scattered fighters, but dozens of Hellcats diving from above with the sun at their backs. The Zeros tried to turn to use their legendary maneuverability, but the Americans refused to engage. They made high-speed passes, raked the formations with .50 caliber fire, and climbed away. The slow, vulnerable Vals and Jills were massacred, shot down one after another like clay pigeons. Of the 69 aircraft in the first wave, only 27 reached the American fleet. Anti-aircraft fire, vastly improved since 1942 with proximity fuses and radar-directed guns, destroyed most of the rest. One bomb struck the battleship South Dakota, causing minor damage. That was the sum total of Japanese success. On the Taiho, Ozawa received fragmentary radio reports, heavy fighter opposition, losses mounting, unable to locate carriers, then silence. The frequencies that should have been filled with pilot chatter went dead. Where were his aircraft? Where were his men? Before the first wave had even engaged, Ozawa had launched a second strike. 130 aircraft, his largest wave. At 11 o'clock a.m., American radar picked it up. Again, only 33 penetrated, and of those, only 7 survived long enough to attack. They scored 0 hits on 15 carriers, 7 battleships, and dozens of escorts. A third strike of 47 aircraft met the same fate. 40 were destroyed. 7 returned. They accomplished nothing. By early afternoon, Ozawa was staring at loss reports that defied belief. He had launched nearly 250 aircraft. Fewer than 50 had returned. The radio was haunted by brief, desperate transmissions. "They're everywhere. I'm hit." Then static. Some aircraft limped back, shot full of holes, pilots wounded, telling stories of overwhelming fighter swarms. Most simply vanished. Only 33 penetrated, and of those, only 7 survived long enough to attack. They scored 0 hits on 15 carriers, 7 battleships, and dozens of escorts. A third strike of 47 aircraft met the same fate. 40 were destroyed. 7 returned. They accomplished nothing. By early afternoon, Ozawa was staring at loss reports that defied belief. He had launched nearly 250 aircraft. Fewer than 50 had returned. The radio was haunted by brief, desperate transmissions. "They're everywhere. I'm hit." Then static. Some aircraft limped back, shot full of holes, pilots wounded, telling stories of overwhelming fighter swarms. Most simply vanished. Total losses: 179 aircraft destroyed in less than 4 hours. Nearly 200 pilots dead or missing. In exchange, 1 bomb hit on a battleship. An aide muttered what everyone was thinking. This is impossible. But it wasn't. It was industrial warfare in its purest form. American pilots later described the engagement with brutal honesty. One Hellcat pilot wrote in his log, It was like an old-time turkey shoot. They came in large, uncoordinated formations, easy targets. We shot them down so fast our guns were overheating. Another said, they tried to dogfight us. Bad mistake. We just dive away, climb, and attack from a different angle. They couldn't keep up. A third admitted, I felt bad for them. They were brave, no question, but they were green kids flying into a meat grinder. It was slaughter, not combat. The Americans lost 23 aircraft that day, most to operational accidents, not combat. The kill ratio, more than 13-1. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. And for Ozawa, watching from his flagship, it was the moment he understood the war was truly, definitively lost. As if the air disaster wasn't enough, catastrophe struck from beneath the waves. At 9:10 a.m., the USS Albacore, a Gato-class submarine, had maneuvered into position and fired 6 torpedoes at the Tai-Ho. One struck the carrier on the starboard side, rupturing aviation fuel lines. Initially, the damage seemed manageable. The ship remained operational. Aircraft could still launch, but gasoline vapor began seeping through the hangar deck. An inexperienced damage control officer made a fatal error. He ordered the ventilation system turned on to disperse the fumes. Instead of venting overboard, the system spread the vapor throughout the ship. At 3:32 p.m., a single spark, possibly from an electrical junction, ignited the vapor. The explosion ripped through multiple decks, turning the interior into an inferno. Secondary explosions from stored ordnance followed. Ozawa felt the deck heave beneath him. Within minutes, it was clear the ship was doomed. He transferred his flag to the cruiser Haguro and watched as Japan's newest carrier, symbol of naval resurgence, capsized and sank at 8:28 p.m., taking 1,650 men with it. At 12:20 p.m., the USS Kavala torpedoed the Shokaku, one of only 2 Pearl Harbor veterans still afloat. Like the Tai-Ho, it suffered fuel leaks that ignited. At 3:01 p.m., it exploded and sank, killing 1,272 men. In a single day, Ozawa lost 2 fleet carriers, not to air attack, but to submarines he never saw. By evening, the tally was apocalyptic. 3 carriers sunk, Taiyo, Shokaku, and the next day Hio. Over 300 aircraft destroyed. More than 400 pilots dead or missing. American losses, 23 aircraft, 0 ships, fewer than 50 casualties. That night, aboard the Haguro, Ozawa sat alone with the loss reports. He had started the day with 430 aircraft. He now had fewer than 130, 70% of his air strength, gone in one day, and not lost inflicting corresponding damage, but lost for almost nothing. He understood what this meant. Aircraft could theoretically be replaced. Pilots could not. Those 400 dead and missing represented a significant portion of Japan's remaining carrier-qualified aviators. With fuel shortages, shattered training infrastructure, Ozawa pulled out intelligence reports on American production. The numbers had always seemed exaggerated. Now, he believed them. The U.S. was producing over 9,000 aircraft per month, more than Japan's entire 1944 output of 28,000. The F-6F Hellcat alone was being built at a rate exceeding Japan's total fighter production. Essex-class carriers were entering service at nearly 2 per month. Japan's carrier construction had ground to a halt. The strategic reality was inescapable. Saipan would fall. B-29s would bomb Japan. The merchant fleet, bringing oil from the East Indies, was being strangled by American submarines. The empire was dying, and there was no way to reverse it. In a personal journal entry later discovered by U.S. occupation forces, Ozawa wrote, "Today, I witnessed the end of Japanese naval aviation. Our pilots fought bravely, but bravery is not enough against such overwhelming technical and numerical superiority. The Americans have built a machine of war that we cannot match, cannot counter, cannot defeat. Every day we continue this war, thousands more will die, and the outcome will be the same. We have already lost. We simply haven't admitted it yet." He knew he could never voice this publicly. In 1944 Japan, such honesty was treason. In the days that followed, Ozawa faced the same dilemma that had tormented Admiral Yamamoto after Midway: how to report a catastrophic defeat to a high command that refused to hear bad news. His staff urged him to soften the blow, emphasize claimed hits, downplay losses, present it as a tactical setback. Ozawa compromised. The official report acknowledged heavy losses, but used vague language and inflated claims of American damage. It suggested the Americans had also suffered heavily, a fiction that preserved morale but prevented the Navy from learning the truth. The culture of denial deepened. Surviving pilots were reassigned and forbidden to discuss the battle. Propaganda declared the Philippine Sea a hard-fought victory, claiming multiple American carriers sunk. The lost carriers remained on official rosters as under repair. This refusal to confront reality ensured Japan would repeat the same mistakes. Inadequate training, obsolete tactics, technological inferiority. None were addressed, because doing so would require admitting defeat. And in Imperial Japan, defeat was unthinkable. Ozawa, in private conversations, was blunt. "We lost because we sent poorly trained pilots in obsolete aircraft against an enemy with vastly superior training and technology. No amount of fighting spirit can overcome such a disparity." But fundamental rethinking was impossible in 1944. The militarists controlling Japan were committed to fighting to the bitter end. Suggestions of peace were treason. Officers who expressed doubt were relieved or worse. The war continued. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Leyte Gulf, where Japanese carriers sailed with empty flight decks as decoys, their pilots long gone. Each defeat confirmed what Ozawa had realized on June 19. The war was lost, and continuing it only prolonged the agony. After the war, historians confirmed Ozawa's assessment in full. American records showed the staggering disparity. Japanese interrogations revealed a consistent theme. Officers admitted they knew their pilots were inadequately trained. One flight instructor, captured in 1945, said, "After 1943, we were sending boys to fight men. Our training program had collapsed. We sent them to combat with 100 hours against Americans with 600. It was murder, not warfare. The Battle of the Philippine Sea destroyed the last remnants of Japanese carrier air power. Japan never again conducted a major carrier operation. The industrial avalanche that Yamamoto had warned about had buried Japanese naval aviation exactly as predicted." And the moment of realization, the point where defeat became undeniable, was June 19th, 1944, when Vice Admiral Ozawa watched 300 aircraft and 400 pilots vanish in a single day. His story mirrors others from the war. Yamamoto warning of American industrial might. Canaris reporting on Willow Run bomber production. German engineers examining a P-47 and calculating Germany's inability to compete. In each case, competent professionals gave accurate assessments. They were dismissed because the truth contradicted ideology. Their predictions came true. Thousands died unnecessarily, and their vindication brought no satisfaction, only grief. Ozawa's tragedy was not just the loss of ships or men. It was that the disaster was predictable, avoidable. In the end, reality does not negotiate. Mathematics does not care about fighting spirit. Industrial capacity trumps tactical brilliance. And the admiral who knew all of this, who tried to adapt within a rigid, denial-driven system, was silenced by the very culture that ensured Japan's defeat. His wisdom was vindicated. But by then, it was far too late.